can relate to some nights going to bed working at a Costa as I was, thinking, has that decision I've just made unknowingly created some really catastrophic consequences for when the world opens back up in terms of furloughing teams and deciding what you do with your team and resources. And the sense I get, and I've never seen your P&L, but I've been in the office many times since the world opened back up, and I think the buzz that you've got as a team and as a culture and the way this team feels when I'm in this office, I think, you know, you're probably being a bit modest. I think you've come out really strong, and I think you've maintained a great culture.
I think particularly within agency world, there's lots of sort of chest puffing sometimes, you know, networking events, and agencies are talking what they've winning, what they've won.
Everyone's always doing brilliantly, aren't they? Have you noticed?
All of the kind of cliched sort of we were approached by. It's like, were you, or did you chase them for a long kind of period of time?
You were really deep in a challenging situation with COVID.
Yes.
And how you've survived and then pivoted. So whilst we hope for nothing like that in terms of crisis in the future, maybe some lessons from that would be great.
I remember getting on calls with pretty much every Friday for about 6 months. You know, there was like 15, 20 agents all come together, and it was really interesting because everybody let their guard down. And no one was winning work, so everybody, you know, there was no kind of what we're winning and what we're making and the rest of it. Everyone was
the ego's left.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result of that, some of that has kind of stuck, which is nice.
We're here today in central London for another episode of the Commercial Confidence Podcast. We're going to hear from Nick Adams, the CEO of Sense Marketing, on the future of experiential marketing and on ROI-driven shopper marketing activities. Welcome to the podcast. So first things first, Nick, thank you so much for hosting us today.
Absolute pleasure.
Really good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So look, we normally start with a brief introduction for our guests.
Yep.
So what we'd love to do is hear a bit about you, both work and maybe outside work, and take us from the start of the career through to today.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you firstly for the opportunity, Ant. So I'm Nick Adams, founder and CEO here at Sense. We are a brand experience and shopper agency. Just going back, we're 20 years old this year. So I've been doing what I've been doing for 20 years, which is pretty kind of scary. Prior to that, came out of university, classic, not really sure what I was going to do at that point. Fell into an agency role, which I thought at the time was an advertising agency. It took me sort of 6-7 weeks to actually understand what the agency did, which was more below the line, through the line, using that sort of jargon territory, and then had great fortune, stayed at agency for 14 years or so. The latter 4 years was setting up a new subsidiary for that agency, which I guess was my sort of cutting the teeth and setting up your own kind of business. Got the entrepreneurial kind of bug at that point, and then set up Sense in 2004.
Fantastic.
And still touch wood, still here today.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit more about Sense in terms of who you work with, the projects that really excite you as a team.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really exciting things about, or certainly why I've always remained agency side, is just the variety and variation of projects. So we work with business to consumer brands, and we do some business to business kind of work. So about 70% of our work is for FMCG brands. So, the likes of Molson Coors and Unilever, Ferrero, classic kind of consumer goods packaged kind of industry brands. And then, we work with some smaller scale up startup brands, even sometimes on that kind of journey as well. So that variety is fantastic. It keeps it so interesting, I think, and kind of exciting. And then on the flip side of that, we have some clients that sit outside of consumer packaged goods. So, the likes of Merlin Entertainment and Marriott, and some work for TikTok. We're mostly based in the UK here, but we've got an office that we set up in New York in 2016 or so. So great variety, kind of seeing and operating in two kind of different markets.
Yeah.
And the work that we do is very kind of broad and wide ranging. So brand experience, I guess the collective terminology for everything and anything which is kind of live. That can be a sampling campaign for an FMCG brand, right up to, again, using the buzzwords, the world of immersive and, interactive experiences that we might kind of do, and really kind of everything in between.
So bring that to life for us. Tell us about 2 or 3 really cool projects that you did maybe in the last 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, some of the cool projects we do, we're approaching our silly seasons, we call it. May to September is when the business and the team is kind of manic. So we'll do lots of work at festivals, for instance. So, festival activation last year for Madrí beer, for instance. So, classic brand experience brief, that kind of lovely challenge of how do we bring to life the soul of Madrid and the brand proposition within the world of
in a rainy festival
in a rainy festival in Devon or wherever we might be. Yeah. So that is 3-4 months of hard kind of planning and working through all the kind of creative ideation, and then we click into the logistics and making sure all of the kind of the wheels stay on and all of the moving parts kind of happen in the right way and that kind of thing.
So a hugely creative emphasis, but a huge logistical and project management.
Yeah, exactly. And our kind of year does tend to be, or the skill sets in the business it is 2 sides of that kind of coin. January, February, March time, we're doing lots of pitching, we're doing lots of planning. That's the more strategic kind of thinking, bringing your marketing capabilities to the table, if you like. And then we literally click into operational mode, and it's about coordinating all of our different partners and suppliers to bring a festival to kind of life. Wide kind of range. We'll do a lot of kind of PR stunts as well, or sort of stunts which are designed for that kind of wholesale amplification piece. So, a live moment that is engaging and disruptive and impactful as a way to then kind of create content to get to a broader audience. And then completely different still is the work we do in Shopper. So, about 3 years ago, we set up a shopper team. We kind of realized for the business with doing so much work for FMCG, it was really for us kind of the final part of the journey, really. We're doing so much out away from retailers and building the brand and, getting these kind of connections with consumers that it felt a very obvious thing then to move over the threshold into in-store kind of and shopper marketing. So that looks, again, something completely different to the world of being in a muddy field.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We were talking to Mike Luck previously, and we talked about that movement of sales and marketing budgets coming closer together, more money being spent closer to the point of purchase. I think absolutely you're reading the tea leaves right, and there's a big opportunity, and I gather it's going really well for you. So it's exciting, really exciting.
No, absolutely.
So clearly you've been on a business ownership journey longer than I have. And you've shared some fantastic lessons with me, which I can only say thank you for, since we've known each other the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
But I suppose you were really deep in a challenging situation with COVID.
Yes.
And how you've survived and then pivoted. So whilst we hope for nothing like that in terms of crisis in the future, maybe some lessons from that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a very kind of difficult time for the period, for the period for the business, should I say? Face-to-face marketing in the face of social distancing were not particularly good bedfellows, shall we say? Projects. Literally, I remember the phone ringing, getting cancelled, and sometimes pushed back and then pushed back again. So it was a pretty kind of torrid sort of time. I suppose, did we pivot as well as other agencies or other kind of businesses? I probably thinking back, no, we didn't really. I mean, we did some things differently. We were fortunate enough to do some work for certain clients where it wasn't necessarily live work, things like kind of toolkits and non-face-to-face. Yeah. So from a commercial perspective, that kind of kept the lights on, which was kind of good. But it was a very challenging time. How do you, within a matter of weeks or months, reinvent the business, reinvent your product, suddenly spin on a sixpence and do something totally different? And, we didn't do it. We found it really challenging. To kind of reinvent yourself overnight was particularly difficult. And I think there are many businesses out there that had much bigger success stories than we managed to kind of achieve. But the silver lining for us was it gave us a good, decent period of time to reflect on the business, to think, how are we going to grow the business kind of moving forward? And probably things like getting more into shopper were always aspirations, probably obvious things for us to do in terms of organic growth, but there was perhaps never the kind of time, you get so wrapped up in delivering the day-to-day of the business. But COVID was a time where the brakes were on. We had time on our hands, and reflecting back, probably a good thing about it was a real period of kind of reflection on the business, and it did actually allow us to make some decisions and do some things differently that perhaps we wouldn't have done if it wasn't for a pandemic.
Absolutely.
Definitely some challenging time and lots of lessons learned for sure. But as I say, pivoting and changing what you were doing overnight is really, really kind of difficult, very intuitive, and I'm not sure any business really is ever, is not ready for that.
No, absolutely.
It's a completely extraordinary scenario. Yeah.
I can relate to some nights going to bed working at a Costa as I was, thinking, has that decision I've just made unknowingly created some really catastrophic consequences for when the world opens back up in terms of furloughing teams and deciding what you do with your team and resources. And the sense I get, and I've never seen your P&L, but I've been in the office many times since the world opened back up, and I think the buzz that you've got as a team and as a culture and the way this team feels when I'm in this office, I think you're probably being a bit modest. I think you've come out really strong, and I think you've maintained a great culture. So I think that's you never quite know if you're doing the right thing when you're in those challenging situations.
No, exactly.
I think the testimony is that the business has stood that test.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. And one of the conscious decisions, I guess, was to make a slightly kind of leaner team than where we're at. Pre-COVID, we were probably sort of 20% kind of bigger in terms of headcount than we are now. That changed my roles, senior team roles, as you kind of get bigger as an agency and bigger sort of headcounts, certainly. And one of the reflections from COVID was, when did we perhaps have our best time as a business? I don't mean commercially, I probably mean, fulfillment in what we were doing and enjoying what you were doing, and actually kind of think, well, actually that was a few years ago when we were a bit kind of smaller, we're a bit more in touch with much more in touch with our team, perhaps a bit more in touch with the work and what actually makes it kind of successful. So part of what we did in COVID was the whole values piece, which we'd never done, should have done it in the first year, as setting up a business, but never did. It was just, let's get on, let's win clients, let's make some money. So all of that good stuff of proposition and internal employee value proposition, all that kind of stuff we hadn't done before. So we did that through the COVID period, and out the other side, I think we're a tighter team, made us understand, what we were looking for in terms of talent, recruiting based on attitudes and all that kind of good stuff. That was a real win, I think, of COVID probably.
Yeah, fantastic. And talk to me about Shopper, because I've known you more recently, and therefore as you've evolved into that space, as well as doing what you guys do brilliantly, but tell me about the Shopper side.
I mean, it's been really an interesting part of the journey. I mean, I did a little bit of work when it was years ago, in my previous kind of agency role, when I don't think we even called it Shopper, I think we called it in-store marketing. And as I say, all of the work that we do for brands, ultimately, whether that is about driving as I say, attitudinal kind of understanding towards a brand and brand equity. That's what I'm trying to say. It's kind of brand equity, or projects which are more overtly sales driving. Ultimately, of course, it's about helping the brand get that long-term traction, penetration, loyalty, etc. So as I say, it felt a very, and with marketing, becoming much more sort of joined up, and you referenced it earlier in terms of, brand marketing working more closely with trade marketing, we felt that there was an opportunity there to help our clients in a way that we hadn't previously, by actually then extending our capabilities and our expertise and closing that loop for brands. So whatever we're doing away from store, if there's an application, if there's a way in which it can integrate to help the consumer, push the consumers on that journey to be shoppers, then that sort of joined up thinking, I guess, was this sort of opportunity that we sort of saw. And from a business perspective, it's fantastic in terms of longevity of relationships, I think, with kind of clients, or certainly our shopper clients. The world of experiential is for most brands, it's a very project-driven, project-based kind of discipline. You turn it on, you'll turn it off, depending on the year or MPD you're doing, whatever. Where, of course, not many brands, I don't think, can turn off their shopper marketing unless they really want to upset their customers.
So their buyer, baked into budgets. And as much as we talk about organisations going down a zero-based budgeting route, the simple absolutely evaluate every penny that you spend.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to spend it on that, then the customer expects to understand what are you going to spend it on instead. So that's where the evaluation piece really, really kicks in. And I know we had some conversations last year around certain opportunities where there was definitely a disconnect between brand and sales, and the opportunity to say there's so much more measurement that can be done here in real time based on loyalty data, based on EPOS data. Then actually we can really see the difference it's driving in that particular area in and around a store.
Yeah, absolutely. And we find that particularly with, we look to do a lot of, sampling campaigns for kind of brands. And ultimately, the purpose of sampling on whatever level you do it is about getting a product into people's hands or mouths in a way they reevaluate it, or you introduce it to them so they then go and buy. So it's about driving penetration. But so many of those campaigns are never measured on actual sales, because it's pretty hard to be able to kind of do that. And, you require, the data is somewhere out there within our clients' organizations, certainly within the retailers, but it's kind of knitting those things together. So how we help clients now, and through different partnerships that we've managed to put in place over the last couple of years or so, is really be able to bring to the table a very quantifiable way in which that is kind of possible. I think I like to feel that's really helped our clients in that regard as well. And it's I think also back to kind of sense, it's a great contrast with our brand experience work in terms of, the lead times we're working to on the shopper kind of projects. With brand experience, it's very typical that, we'll have a brief and an activity will be live within a matter of weeks. It's nice to work slightly more, sometimes a bit more strategically and a bit more long term in the world of retail marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think often people who work with retailers or work in retail think they work to really quick, short lead times, but absolutely, it's 100 times faster, isn't it? In that world that Sense originated. Originated from. It's quite interesting with that dynamic between sales budgets and marketing budgets. And I've seen a few organisations recently put a commercial marketing type role or function or set of responsibilities into a team. So if you've got sponsorship and endorsements with sports celebrities or other celebrities, what value are you getting from that contract? But equally, what's the measurability of some of that shopper campaign? So I just think that world of sales and marketing are coming closer together. I think the expectation on a brand manager, a shopper marketing manager, and an account manager around those executions is growing. And I think you're brilliantly positioned to provide those perspectives.
Right. Yeah. No. I think that's. It's so kind of the moment at the moment. Of course, cost of living and economic, pressures and kind of all the rest of it. Let's face it. A lot of experiential marketing for some brands can often be seen as a discretionary spend. It's creative and it's visible and it's all of the good points and strong points is what makes brand experience kind of marketing really, really kind of powerful. But in tougher times, absolutely, you need to go to the next level of really understanding what's that doing for the brand. And we're being asked some, tougher questions, or as tough questions as we've ever been asked in 20 years, as to what is the commercial reality, or the commercial viability justification for what's being spent. That's a lot of that conversation kind of happening at the moment.
And are you finding it's make a decision about reducing the budget first and then go out to maximize value for money? Is it that extreme, or is it more about, we're going to spend similar to what we spent previously, but we're going to really, really scrutinize it that much harder?
It's a little bit of a combination of both, I think. There are certainly some brands and some sectors that are sort of holding their spend in terms of experiential. And yes, there's more pressure being applied to, let's now really dig into what this is kind of doing, or expectations it's going to work, or it needs to work harder than it's ever worked before. But on the flip side, absolutely, there are a lot of brands who hold the same vision and aspiration and ambitions for their live brand experience, but the budgets now are significantly less in some sectors. A lot of what we're doing at the moment is trying to deliver against some leaner kind of budgets, but still meet those expectations. And I think that brings a lot of the need for sort of transparency and honesty kind of with it. It's in its sort of agency mindset, there's often that temptation to say, yep, we can absolutely kind of do that, and of course we can meet those kind of those objectives and that kind of criteria. But I think it's being kind of realistic in terms of what
if the world is changing around us, it's facing into that and managing those expectations. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe pivoting slightly to a different topic. I think one thing you're incredibly modest about is 20 years. Business you founded, business you're running, business you're leading brilliantly. I'd love to just understand some of those really critical times, maybe outside the pandemic, critical times as the business grew and evolved, some of those big lessons and big learnings that you've taken out of that and things you're really proud of as well.
Yeah. Gosh, I suppose I've been going right back to the kind of start, really. I think one of the big sort of lessons I think we kind of went through, or sort of I went through in the early kind of months, is to not necessarily kind of think too hard in terms of perhaps, the longer term initially. It's so exciting when you set up kind of an agency and you are around that kitchen, that sort of cliche around the kind of kitchen table. And absolutely, we thought about what we wanted to be and what the proposition was and how we're going to make our sort of space in the market at all, of course. But equally at the same time, it was about just cracking on and winning clients and kind of playing the cards that are in front of you, as our mutual friend Paul would sort of say, And I suppose so. What I'm trying to say is, I guess, kind of looking back, did we get that balance right? We may have just faced in a little bit too quickly and hard into the work. And I mentioned kind of not doing things like, what are our values and how do we want to behave as a business? For right or wrong, we just charged straight into, let's go and win some clients. Let's get out there, excited to kind of work with brands. So we probably could have, a lesson probably is if I did it, again, it's a little bit perhaps more time, interrogation and rigor, perhaps in terms of the business kind of planning. And I guess over the years, we've very much grown the business in an organic way. I'm, relatively cautious by kind of nature. So again, for right or wrong, we haven't taken huge, great, bold kind of risks necessarily. Should we have taken a few more? Probably yes. And we may be in a different kind of position now, but it's been very much a kind of, sort of build and grow over the years. Moving into America was brilliant. It was
pretty bold.
Yeah, I mean, it was never the plan. It was never in any kind of business plan ever. We were working with a client, the Economist in the UK, and there was an opportunity to do what we were doing in the UK in the US, and so it was one of those moments where we had to put our hand up, otherwise we would have missed. We would have been stupid, sort of thing. So, that was a brilliant part of the journey. Learning curve, absolutely sharp incline for 18 months or so. And it was a great period in terms of having like two kind of teams, two slightly different kind of cultures. I'd go out to America and it was a real startup mentality still, and a handful of kind of people, and then come back to London and a very different sort of setup and different kind of pressures and opportunities and that kind of thing. So that's been a great kind of part of the journey.
Yeah. And who else do you work with out in the US now?
Client-wise,
yeah.
So we work with Marriott International, so do quite a lot of kind of events for them. We had a fantastic opportunity last October. We did Nobu's 30th anniversary.
I saw that,
party, which was great. I mean, true. It was a pinch me kind of moment. I mean, it was a 600-person event in New York to celebrate Chef Nobu's building the empire over sort of 30 years, and
with a massive press attention.
It was quite kind of high profile, but it was one of those projects where you sort of personally and as a business, we took out so much more than just the sort of satisfaction of delivering it. What I mean by that was looking at that as an organization, as a business. The whole evening was a celebration of their culture. There was a tear-jerking film that played that tracked people who had been there from man and boy, if you like. It was a real insight into, on a much hugely different and larger kind of scale, how a business has had the lasting power of 30 years. So I think myself and Sarah, my colleague, and others, we came away really deep admiration for that as kind of a business.
But you must have been incredibly proud to know that you led that for them. Because for them, that's a critical moment in their history.
Yeah, exactly.
And they trusted you to do that for them.
Definitely, yes. It was a real kind of privilege, and huge effort from our team in kind of America, who did a fantastic job. And I pretty much just sort of walked in, enjoyed it, was like a punter, like everybody else. And there's not many occasions where you can kind of do that. So all credit to my colleague Sarah and the team that delivered it on the ground, giving me the opportunity to just enjoy it like I was one of the guests. Was superb. We did a lot of work with ByteDance, TikTok. So that's that's obviously a bit of a checkered kind of past over the last kind of 18 months or so in America, but we've done a lot of work there. Mark Anthony brands, which is a great kind of business and projects to be involved with. We have a partnership with an agency called Hue and Cry. I think we're sort of building up more partnerships with different kind of complementary agencies, but that's an example where we jointly work on Mark Anthony brands, and that's a whole different type of kind of work that we're doing. And then what else? Well, we do a bit of work with Moonbug Entertainment. So
who are they? Tell me about them.
So Moonbug are a big entertainment company. They have a whole number of different properties and franchises in their world, one of which is Blippi, who I think we've heard, if you've got kids of a certain age,
I've heard of,
My kids are a bit older now, but Blippi is, I remember Mr. Tumble with my kids. It's probably a bad analogy. That was probably kind of summed that up really badly and offended Blippi. So apologies if he's listening. But Blippi is taken America by storm. Started on YouTube, I think, now on kind of mainstream TV. So we created a huge event for Blippi. It was actually filmed, so it became one of the episodes in the kind of series. So again, the variety I mentioned in terms of work. One of our Christy, our sort of lead colleague in America, one day she's helping Nobu advise on, the kind of the format and the running of VIP event. The next day she's putting on a dinosaur suit because we were short of an extra for the background of the filming. So that
feels a bit like VAT return and then recording a podcast. I will ask my 7-year-old when I get home tonight.
I'm sure they know Blippi. Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah. But as you say, that's another great example of just the sheer variety that comes with running a business, where project management, great experiential marketing, but people trust you across a multitude of categories and industries, but you get that variety, which is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. Huge kind of variety. And that is one of the things I love, but it's one of the big challenges as well. There's all the variety of running a business, the VAT returns and all of the kind of the running of the business. And then I guess we're in we are an agency discipline where there's a huge breadth of work as well. So it's kind of variety in spades, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the future, where are things going for the future?
It's a very good question. 20 years on, I suppose, is a little bit kind of a milestone. We want to, as I say, having gone through the COVID period and slightly kind of reshaped and reset the business, it feels like not kind of new beginnings at all, but it feels like we're on the sort of, phase 2 almost. Growing the business over the next coming years or so. I think there's loads of opportunity there at the moment, from the days of COVID where I think it was being questioned whether experiential marketing would ever come back as kind of discipline, to now where it's in great growth, or the statistics and figures from whatever kind of report that you might read indicate that experience is firmly kind of back on the scene. So I think the opportunity moving forward is truthfully as great, I think, as it's ever been. So plans in terms of the business is to again face into that opportunity, organically grow, particularly around our shopper proposition and particularly in America as well, because I think those two opportunities are kind of great. So a bit of doubling down on those two kind of particular things, win some great work with some great clients, continue kind of doing what we're doing for the foreseeable.
Fantastic.
That's the plan.
That's great. Yeah. So I kind of like to pivot the conversation to that topic of commercial confidence, which we talk about a lot, and I talk about with many people. It can be quite lonely being a business owner and being an entrepreneur, whether it's in the early stages or it's later on. I'd be really interested to understand some of your sources of coaching, guidance, support. Where have you sought that over the 20 years in particular, let alone probably before that? Yeah,
I think certainly one of the things I've kind of learned, I suppose, is there's a lot about kind of being a leader, I think, where you put a lot of pressure on yourself, and particularly I'll probably still do a little bit of it kind of now, but certainly in the early years, you think as the CEO or the business leader or whatever your sort of title, it's about coming up with all of the direction, coming up with all of the kind of answers, the guy at the top that's leading the vision and how to kind of get there. And I think that, that does stoop a lot of kind of pressure on yourself. Where have I got that sort of inspiration from, or that kind of help or guidance? For me, it's mentors, and sort of by that, I think a tight-knit selection of peers within the industry. I think particularly within agency world, there's lots of sort of chest puffing sometimes, networking events, and agencies are talking what they've winning, what they've won.
Everyone's always doing brilliantly, aren't they? Have you noticed?
But all of the kind of cliched sort of we were approached by. It's like, were you, or did you chase them for a long kind of period of time? So what I've found over the years is, I meet every quarter with 4 or 5 just closest competitors, really, but we have an honest relationship. So neither, if it's rubbish, we say it's rubbish. We compare war wounds and all that, what's gone wrong and all that sort of thing. And I think that's been quite cathartic over the years. I love that kind of honesty, just letting our guard down, and that's been really helpful. And I think you can learn so much, and just knowing that other businesses, other individuals, exactly the same struggles as you, exactly the same challenges, and actually just that reminder you're not alone.
I'm not going mad here.
Yeah, exactly. It's really kind of helpful. And I think over the years, I hope, my team may disagree with me, but I hope what I've been able to do is, or certainly what I've got some sort of help from, is just looking at those that are working around me, and taking inspiration and confidence from them. So realizing that I don't necessarily need to be the person with all the answers. I'm quite I feed off other people's, enthusiasm, optimism, and sort of determination and those kind of things. And I love working with different people in the business who have got a different kind of outlook, because if I'm around people who have got that energy and that kind of drive, it kind of doubles mine, and I kind of feed off that. So a couple of things that over the years have been really, really kind of helpful.
Yeah, and I think I grew up in the world of FMCG brands, as you know, and it's really interesting when you talk to people from different, even industries serving the same industry, if that makes sense. The willingness to, without sharing anything really confidential, but sharing general themes, patterns, trends, strategic thought processes with competitors. I've been amazed as I've gone on the journey I've been on over the last 3 years, just how prevalent those kind of conversations are, and how much energy and power those can create. And when we were talking to Ali Fisher 3 or 4 weeks ago, she was urging brands to come together, because actually, whilst you can still win on market share on the laundry category, the bigger questions around sustainability and things like that, actually, those really difficult things are easier to crack together than they are separately. So
that's really interesting.
There's a benefit, isn't there, of having those conversations to understand if the pattern is the same for everyone, or if it is unique. But actually, again, there's ways that you can cross-pollinate ideas to overcome that. Industry,
definitely. And that was another good thing about COVID for us. To be honest, I remember getting on calls with pretty much every Friday for about 6 months. There was like 20 agents all come together, and it was really interesting because everybody let their guard down, and no one was winning work. So everybody, there was no kind of what we're winning and what we're making and the rest of it. Everyone was
the ego's left.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result of that, some of that has kind of stuck, which is nice.
That's good.
And again, we've got relationships, and I have conversations with other agency owners where you do help each other out. Definitely with competitors, yes, but there's big enough opportunity out there for all of us. And it's just there are definitely ways where it's easier, and both businesses can benefit if you're just look at the synergies, look at the ways in which we can kind of help each other. It might be sharing a client, it may be helping each other with expertise where one of you is stronger than the other. So I definitely think that's quite a sort of theme, I think, that's happening in our industry at the moment, particularly amongst sort of independent, smaller kind of businesses. How can we help each other, in that sort of collective kind of way?
A slightly strange experience recently where, having really kind of thought about our strategy and refined it slightly, I realised that actually something that we were pursuing wasn't in our sweet spot, and actually it's not something we really wanted to do. And I found it very strange to recommend an organisation to somebody. It felt quite good because I genuinely thought they would get the best service from that organisation. But the more time I spend doing this, the more comfortable I get. I know what we do really, really, really well.
Yeah.
But if you want that, then I would absolutely recommend it. There's 2 or 3 organisations that I really admire, and I admired them from the perspective of being a brand, an employee and a brand owner.
Right. Yes.
But it does feel a bit strange the first few times you
know
do it. But it comes back to serve you as well.
I think so. Yeah, and we find, I think brands are so much more open-minded that we're working at the moment. And there was definitely a time where you didn't want to tell a client that you couldn't do something. You'd find a way of kind of doing it, and you'd pull in their expertise, and you wanted to be jack of all, kind of, if you like. Whereas I feel now that even, you know, our big brand clients are very open to that. You know, that sort of philosophy on that sort of way of working, which is, okay, Sense, you're going to be our lead partner in this project, but you're pulling in, you know, expertise from here and here, and that's great because we get best of all kind of worlds, you know, best in class in some very kind of specific areas. So I think, positively so, clients are more open-minded. Certain clients are more open-minded than they've perhaps ever been on that kind of front.
I kind of wonder, is it partly a generational thing, because of course, you know, same employer for life is very different now to when maybe my parents were growing up, but also that mentality of people wanting portfolio careers or doing, you know, gig work. There's just generally a mindset that says, if I trust Sense or I trust Sellex, but they say it's slightly outside their wheelhouse, but they've identified someone that they know, like, and trust in terms of their capability, I think there is just a generally more open-minded approach to these things, isn't there?
Definitely. And I think in our world, where again we're a very project-based kind of agency, you know, there are definitely, you know, times have definitely changed in terms of clients more shopping around perhaps than they did once. To, you know, pitches are so much more competitive. We're pitching against 5 agencies, 6 agencies, not 2 or 3, you know, often, those kind of things. It's a really important reminder of that, playing the kind of long game, you know, be transparent, be honest, because obviously, you know, trust and relationship and honesty and transparency, you know, that sort of serves the long term, doesn't it? So,
and it's an incredibly small world, and even it's even smaller now because people are not staying in the same organisation for 20 years. They're maybe going to 3 or 4 organisations 5 years at a time. So we were talking about someone we both know in the industry just before we started, and you wouldn't think we knew the same person, but by virtue of where they'd worked, we suddenly made the connection, and there's lots and lots of that happening, I think.
That sort of, you know, the holy grail in agency terms of being the trusted partner for your client is, I mean, nothing's changed in my X years in the business, you know, that's still, but it's you definitely need to remind yourselves and remind your team that's will always be the case. I think human nature, you know, as businesses change and times change and ways of working and, you know, how relationships kind of come and go, really important to remember those fundamentals.
People buy from people.
Absolutely. The other thing, just going back to your original question in terms of, I think you mentioned a moment ago, sort of learning from people in businesses outside of your industry. And it's very easy in the agency world and London agency world particularly to get sucked into that agency sort of bubble. So, you know, I've got friends and peers that listen to loads of podcasts and read loads of books, etc. Within about agencies, and I do a little bit of that. I try and do as much as I can, but actually, I've over the years found a lot of inspiration from looking outside of agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I first met Paul Mills-Hicks, our now sort of chairman, and he came from Sainsbury's in this huge corporate world. I was like, what have we got in common, Paul? You know, in terms of running Sainsbury's versus running Sense. And Paul's like, there will be similarities. There'll be so many more similarities than you think. And it's absolutely been the case. So it's, you can borrow things from different businesses and industries that perhaps you don't think can be helpful to you.
Often when I've had conversations with Paul in recent times, obviously, I was a supplier to him and he was the commercial director at Sainsbury's. But more recently, it's been very much about something I've witnessed or experienced versus something similar that he's witnessed and experienced. You suddenly realise that the sum of the parts is kind of greater, and it takes the conversation off into some really interesting angles. So 2 different worlds colliding can create some really interesting conversations. And I think the other point you make there was when we met with Lindsay Forster from Shepper pre-Christmas. Lindsay made the point that she believes that the combination of 20 years in financial services. She was in marketing with Aviva and with Lloyd's. But actually, the things that she learned through that process have served her brilliantly as she's come into the Shepper business.
Right.
In terms of experience and translating it, the experiences that she had.
Yeah.
But the reason she now does what she did, she was too far from the action and too far from the project management and too far from the consumer.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the role that you do and I do today, you're so close to the client and the customer that you're learning from them as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a big opportunity.
I mean, particularly in the work that we do, it's very easy, say, to sort of sit in your agency office and try and come up with ideas and strategies and advise clients on what's happening on real world activation. And simple point, but there's nothing better than actually getting out and talking to consumers. I mean, I don't do it as much as I should and I'd like to, but always try and go to as many of our activations as possible. I'm the guy who on a Saturday walking through the shopping mall will see an activation. I'm like, detour with the kids just to go and experience it and talk to the staff and what are you doing and how are you doing it. And I mean, that's it. That's kind of invaluable.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar with me where, if Karen and I, my wife, will go to supermarket together, she'll kind of turn right and start the process. She knows I'm immediately going to turn left. And I kind of go non-food through to food and work my way along. I'll make it 2/3 of the way through the shop. Now, she absolutely accepts that that's just one of the things I need to do as part of my kind of homework. But it's been the same for 20 years. That's what we'll do. But you're right. There's no substitute for when you're on holiday walking through the world duty-free thing. I don't smoke. I don't drink a lot. But I'll go through that part of the airport just to see what's going on and what's interesting. So I don't spend a lot of money. I'm a retailer's worst nightmare. I don't spend a lot of money, but I do a lot of browsing.
Yeah, one toe brand, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nick, we're 20 years in.
Yes.
Take me forward another 5 years. What does it look like over the next 5 years for Sense?
It's, as I say, it's a really kind of exciting time. All the kind of conversation now around the experience kind of economy and consumers kind of craving experience, etc. So I think the opportunity is definitely there, and there's a sort of a rosy future. I think our particular kind of discipline and brands' expectations of it, that's going to keep sort of changing, and the expectations are only kind of going upwards. I think we talked around it before, but I think the integration in terms of experiential marketing with kind of shopper and what it's really kind of it's doing for the brand in terms of it's going to come even more under scrutiny as I think is going to be the kind of case. I think we're going to see loads more opportunity come from technologies. So experiential and shopper is a world away from where it was 10 years ago because of things like digital kind of technologies that can amplify those experiential moments, or that in-store kind of moment, or that brand kind of campaign sort of platform. So the ability now to create a campaign that can truly go global and truly get to kind of millions and millions, it's not a one-off. That's a real opportunity for so many kind of brands there. So I think we're only just kind of on the cusp of that. The technologies and AI and things that has emerged so quickly over the last year, 18 months. I think we're really going to see the benefit of that immersive experiences in the home based on things that have happened for other people elsewhere in the world in person. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we're sort of strapped in to see a lot of change over these, and that's going to add its pressures in terms of keeping up to speed with that and kind of learning and changing your sort of proposition and capabilities as you kind of go. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that. I think the continuation of the sort of prevalence of challenger brands and disruptor brands. When I think back to 20 years ago, I don't think the brands we were working with really cared that much about the smaller kind of guys, and again, fortunately working with the Diageos and the Procter & Gambles. I don't remember us talking about small challenger startup kind of brands. I think now, though, it feels like so much power is with those brands. They're super agile, they're so creative and kind of inventive and getting so much kind of traction. And certainly our bigger clients, they're absolutely on the radar in terms of threats, if you like. I think digital and experiential almost democratize that opportunity, don't they? Yes. As well. Yeah. So you think about, I can't think of many brands, I'm sure someone will write in and correct me, but between maybe the year 2000 and 2010,
nowhere near the number of brands that have caught the imagination in the way they have since. Maybe post the global financial crisis. Some phenomenal brands have come through and just changed the dynamic.
Absolutely. And the really interesting thing from an agency perspective, sense perspective, is that a lot of those brands, they do, we work with them in a very different kind of way of working. I was brought up in a certain kind of, or trained in a certain kind of way, in perhaps a kind of more traditional agency way, slightly more kind of longer term, a bit more sort of textbook marketing, if you like, that kind of thing. A lot of the challenger brands we're working with now, they're working on intuition. They may not be marketeers or commercial people by training or kind of background, but they're having phenomenal, that's the word, success, just doing what they're kind of doing. So coming back to your question, I think over the next 5 years, that's going to be a really interesting thing that will shape our agency client portfolio, hopefully, and how the sort of work we're doing and who we're working with.
I suppose the incubator schemes that the retailers are running, I like to that focus on shopper marketing. The simple fact is that there's a sweet spot there that says they may be working on intuition, but they're working on tight budgets. If there's that measurability there, there's a big opportunity for you to help some of those brands to be massively amplified.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
exciting. Yeah. Really exciting.
Yeah.
So if I could go back to the 10 years younger, Nick.
Yes.
What would your advice be to that Nick around what have you learned over the last 10 years that you could maybe share with our listeners? For personal development, for leadership, and for growing the business.
I think one thing is, I think you think about kind of leadership and commercial sort of confidence. I was thinking about this before. An awful lot of that, it feels like you sort of shortcut to, that comes from experience, that comes from expertise, that comes of being totally sure what you're doing, having been there and done it kind of before. And actually, I find that a lot of the confidence that I've had over the years, I suppose, or what I've got confidence from is those occasions where you do just push yourself into the unknown, and you're out of your comfort zone. And again, you're not fully kind of blagging it. I'm not endorsing that, but if you've got the trust of a client, for instance,
and you're open that it's experimental.
Yeah, exactly. And say when we set up a business in America, I remember having a sort of white surprise conversation with the Economist managing director, and it was very much, look, we're in this together. We know you haven't done this before in America. We're increasing budgets like never before, etc. So it was very much a collective kind of thing. So coming back to your kind of question, I think, the Nick 10 years ago, it's push yourself into those moments. You don't have to always have been there, done that before, because you never, that's unrealistic. Because those are the moments where you really learn and take confidence from those moments that you can kind of apply to the next. So, pushing yourself into the unknown, I suppose, is what perhaps I'd do more of, I guess, if I had time again. Probably not being too preoccupied with other kind of businesses in your sector. Again, it's maybe an agency thing. There's a lot of agencies there's a lot of self comparing. The number one conversation often in networking thing is people talk about headcount. How many people are you now? That actually, there's a lot of kind of preoccupation with other agencies and what they're doing. And over the years, we've probably been too interested in and just too many long conversations in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing it. You never really know, so I think I think my younger self would be, actually don't worry about what others kind of doing. Set your own course, set your own standards.
Get the right people around you.
Yeah, work to what you think is right, work to your standards, not try and constantly calibrate those on other people.
Yeah. I've witnessed a lot over the last 2 or 3 years as I've obviously changed the sort of path of my career. I was always obsessed with the competition when I had infinite amounts of data to measure them against. Mm-hmm. So selling Nescafe, looking at the JDE coffee portfolio, or selling Pepsi, looking at Coke. That's great when you've got really, really precise data to work with. But when it is people bragging on LinkedIn or making up a headcount number,
absolutely,
you're right. You've got to ignore it and stick with, I've got great people, I've got a good strategy, I'm winning more than I'm losing, I'm growing. I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of becoming obsessed with the competitors and not focus on where you're heading. I think that's great advice for anyone listening that's in a similar boat.
And I think it just kind of leads to you feeling like you're not doing as well as anybody else, really. And often, I mean, sometimes you're absolutely not. Of course you're not. But as I going back to those honest conversations with my peers, you walk into those kind of quarterly coffees or having a beer or whatever, thinking, God, everybody's doing so much better than you, and actually they're not. They're often not. They are in some cases, of course they are, but it's a good kind of leveler. Yeah. So don't be too preoccupied with the sort of expectation.
Don't believe everything you hear or see.
Yeah, exactly.
So final question, Nick, in terms of you and your personal development journey, further building that commercial confidence, what do you want to be better at over the next year or two?
Number one, which I'm sure my team would agree with, is that whole thing of working in the business and on the business, that getting that variation, particularly in our world where, we are only as good as our last project often, work in a discipline with so many kind of moving parts, that actually working on our business, I don't have as much time as I should have to do that. So making time for that is kind of quite sort of fundamental. So difficult to kind of do, but for my part, and I know that that comes down to sort of personal capabilities and abilities and that sort of thing. So I think for me that's a really big thing, trying to remind myself to do it, but also upskill and learn new tactics, new ways of working that can help me kind of achieve that and get to that point. That's probably the I mean there are many areas for me, but I think that's probably the big one that I'm reminded of almost every day.
I didn't realize how much I could have capitalized on sort of that principle of time blocking when I worked in the corporate world, because it was so much more predictable and I could have been far better at time blocking. It's now an even harder discipline when you're running a smaller business, but the power of that time and that thinking time, it's very hard to get at, but once you get at it and you get it in the diary, it's really powerful, isn't it? But I wish I'd known the gift that was when I was working in a bigger organization.
And I've only, I think over recently, probably the last few years or so, I'm a quite sort of always on sort of person, and I feel like that's good because it gets me through the most amount of kind of workload and keeps your bandwidth really wide and that kind of thing. But I suppose I'm learning more as I get older, actually that time just out of the business to completely turn off. I used to think that was wasted time, but I could be writing some emails, I could be doing this present, whatever. But actually coming back from holiday and you're clear-headed, you just get to answers quicker for a period of time. It gives you a different perspective. My team probably dread me coming back from holiday because there's always
ideas.
Nick's holidays thoughts.
Nick's holiday ideas.
So I think in terms of personal development, I think that sort of downtime and headspace is as developmental as the hands-on stuff,
Brilliant. That's fantastic. So will we see each other at the Barcode Festival
Absolutely.
this year?
It's always it's in the diary. The summer holidays get juggled around it, so I think Barcode's brilliant, and we're helping lots of clients there this year, so it's always a good one on the calendar.
Great. Definitely. Well, I'll see you there for a beer if I don't see you beforehand.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot.